What's good, family? And welcome back to the dinner table. I hope everybody's having a great week and y'all are getting ready to spend time with y'all's families and y'all's loved ones for the holidays. And as I mentioned before, the 1 year anniversary of the pod is coming up on New Year's Day. And I wanted to do something a little spicy to celebrate the 1 year. So I decided to finally launch my YouTube channel. It's not going to be anything super crazy right now, but I did want to start off by giving y'all some visuals to some of my favorite episodes. So that's what we'll start off with, and then we'll just go from there. So yeah, make sure y'all stay tuned for my YouTube channel because that will be launching on New Year's Day. Okay, now enough of those announcements. This week's case is definitely going to take you there. It's going to have you sad, angry, confused. And while you're listening to the story years later and you're going through all of these emotions, you can only imagine what the victim's family was going through. Now, I was talking to one of my very faithful listeners, and he was telling me, I love your podcast because by telling these stories, it's almost as if you're paying homage or you're paying respect to the victims. And I'm like, that's a good way of putting it. Y'all know I love sharing these cases with y'all. So I definitely want to make sure I pay respect to the victim in this week's case and we keep his name alive. So the young man that I'm going to be telling y'all about this week left his parents' home with a book bag and returned the next day in a body bag. He had his whole life ahead of him. And to this day, his family still doesn't know the truth or have the answers to his death. So I'm not going to keep y'all waiting any longer, and I'm not even going to lie to you. You might want to skip the hot cocoa and the wine this week and just jump right to the tequila because this case is going to take you there. So without further ado, let's dive in.
That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby.
This week at the dinner table, I'll be telling y'all about the mysterious death of 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson. Kendrick, or KJ, was born to his mom, Jackie Johnson, and his dad, Kenneth Johnson, on October 10th, 1995. He was the youngest of three kids, Kenneth Jr., Kenyatta, and then him. And his mom made it a point to have all of her kids' initials KJ, like King Jesus. So as you can probably tell, they were heavily rooted in their faith. Now, Kendrick was a sophomore at Lowndes High School, located in Lowndes County in Valdosta, Georgia. His parents had actually grew up in Valdosta, and his dad was a hardworking truck driver who worked long hours over the road. But he was still very much family-oriented and a huge family man. He spent a lot of his time with his kids, and they were all very family-oriented. Their extended family still lived in Valdosta as well, or stayed somewhere nearby in Georgia. And when they got together, Kendrick was always the life of the party. Everyone who knew him said he was always the happiest kid, always had a smile on his face, clowning around with his sister. They say he would just come home from school and just randomly jump on her back. And when she would finally get him off, she would chase him around the house. But they were always wrestling, clowning around, having water gun fights around the house. There was just never a dull moment with the Johnson family. They were full of love, and Kendrick looked up to his dad so much. He was definitely a daddy's boy. His dad says whenever he would ask Kendrick to wake him up from a nap before he had to get back on the road, Kendrick would never skip a beat. He would always make sure he woke him up on time. He was just very responsible. And overall, he was just an all-around good teenager, good brother, and an even better son. But at school, he was considered a little shy and reserved. He wasn't as outgoing as he was when he was with his family, but he was definitely involved in school sports, and in fact, football was his favorite sport. He eventually wanted to get a scholarship to play college ball, and then, of course, to go pro. And like most teenagers in high school, he had a close group of friends, and they had this tradition where every week they would go out to have wings together. But most importantly, Kendrick was a 17-year-old child. He was somebody's brother, he was somebody's nephew, he was somebody's son, and he was loved. After school on January 10th, 2013, the first day back from holiday break, Kendrick's mom, Jackie, waited patiently for him to get home so she could hear about his day. But when KJ didn't get off the bus at the school drop-off, she of course asked the bus driver if Kendrick had gotten on. but he tells her that he hadn't. So she goes back inside and she asks KJ's sister if he had texted her or mentioned that he was going to be going to a basketball game or anything like that after school. And she tells her no. So the evening hours begin to creep in, and still, nobody had heard back from Kendrick. No calls, no text messages, nothing. And as the night went on, Jackie and Kenneth grew more concerned. And this wasn't like Kendrick, so Jackie's nerves were on edge. So she does what any mother would do. She gets in the car and goes to the last known location where Kendrick would be, the school. So she drives past the school to see if she can see anything, but it was completely dark and shut down. And Kenneth wasn't even home. He was 1,000 miles away picking up a load in New York. So him being away wasn't any help. So imagine that out of control feeling that he must have been feeling. Like he has no idea what's going on back home. And on top of that, he can't get back home fast enough. So with still no response from Kendrick, by midnight, Jackie was filing a missing persons report. And initially the police told her, oh, he's probably just out with some fast-tailed girl. But Jackie knew her son. And KJ knew his mama didn't play about that 10 o'clock curfew. It wasn't no 10:01, no 10:02. 10 o'clock. Be in this house. Plus, it was a school night, so she knew something was wrong. But by 12 o'clock, Kenneth already had this gut-wrenching feeling that his son was dead. So he pulled his truck over where he could, climbed into his bed in the back, and just cried. He said that in that moment, he didn't know why, but he just knew his son was dead. The next morning on January 11th, when Kendrick still wasn't home, Jackie called Kenneth and asked him, what do I do? And he tells her, you need to go up there to that school. So that morning on January 11th by 8 a.m., Jackie and KJ's sister was up at that school. But when that first bell rang and Kendrick still hadn't showed up to school, Jackie soon finds out that Kendrick hadn't made it to his 4th period class the day before either. And then all of a sudden, KJ's sister realizes that a lot of people are going in and out of the gym. And she just finds this a little strange because there's a lot of activity going on while they're trying to search for KJ. And then all of a sudden, it looks like there's something happening in the old gym. So she starts trying to get into the gym, but nobody would let her in. But still, students and faculty are going in and out of the gym. They just won't let her in. Okay, y'all, so quick rewind. The high school has 2 gyms. One's called the old gym and the other one's called the new gym. So in the old gym, some students were hanging out and they saw something in the corner of the gym. They saw something sticking out from one of the gym mats. Now, these gym mats are pretty big and they're about 6 feet tall. I'm pretty sure y'all have seen them before. They're like big foam wrestling or cheerleading mats. So the students say they see something sticking out from the top of one of the mats. Now what they saw was something white. So as they get closer and they look in the middle of it, they realize that this white is socks. And these socks are connected to feet. So this particular mat was standing up vertically, right? And as they get closer, they start smelling that fragrant odor of decomposition mixed with vomit. So they immediately call one of the coaches over. And when the coach gets to the mat, he immediately grabs it and turns it on its side horizontally. So the body's head was facing towards the ground, and the head was laying in a pool of blood. Not only that, but the body was almost completely consumed in these gym mats. Now, one of the arms was down by the side, but the other was up above the head, almost as if you're waving. So after this discovery, the school immediately calls authorities to Lowndes High. A body had just been found in the old gym, and Jackie says at this point she knew they had found him. So she asked one of the school resource officers, "Is that my son they found in the gym?" And the woman responds, "Yes." So Jackie immediately breaks down, hollering and screaming and crying hysterically. And one of the officers comes up to her and pulls her aside and says, "What are you screaming for? We don't even know if that's KJ." And she said, "Has anybody else reported their child missing? Does he have dreads?" And he responds, "Yes." She says, "Then that's my child." Yet they still never let her or any of the Johnson family go into the gym or to even view KJ's body. In fact, the only thing they do is show KJ's sister a photo of one of his shoes to identify his body. Even though the family had already told the police that he had dreads, what he looked like, what he was wearing when he went missing, and they still refused to let them in the gym. And it's at this time when the Johnsons family's lives was turned upside down within a blink of an eye. So to start off this non-existent, half-ass investigation into Kendrick's death, when the police arrive on the scene, they don't wear protective gear, they don't have on any PPE, they don't send the students home, and they did eventually shut down the school for a small period of time to question some students. But other than that, the school day still went on as normal. In fact, the students were all over Facebook and Twitter, texting, and all over social media. And by now, everybody already knew that KJ had been found dead in the gym. And while KJ's mom was in the front of the school screaming and crying her eyes out hysterically, they were carrying on with class, hanging out in the hallways, just going on with their regular scheduled program. Now, cousins, I've been out of high school for a little minute now. In fact, this case actually happened during my senior year in high school. But I know for a fact there's some type of protocol that's supposed to take place when something like this happens, especially when it happens on school campus. Like there's got to be some sort of lockdown, or the students are at least released for the day. Something. But that just didn't happen in this situation. And when the news of KJ's death hit the media and the rest of the Johnson family, they immediately rushed to the school to rally behind Jackie and the rest of the family. KJ's aunt says when she made it to the school, they had Jackie sitting in a wheelchair and she just looked drained, like she was on drugs or something. And not long after his body was discovered, the sheriff's office releases a statement to the family that says, quote, "Although the exact cause of death is yet to be determined, as of this stage in the investigation, nothing has been discovered to indicate foul play was involved." Like, how did y'all come to that conclusion that fast and this early in the investigation? But y'all, to have more context on this case, you have to understand the history of Valdosta, Georgia. So I love the way Jennifer Lewis tells this portion of the story, so I'm going to let y'all listen to a little snippet of the documentary.
When the news broke of this death from Atlanta, like many in America, we thought it was near Atlanta. But after doing some research, we quickly realized that Valdosta and Atlanta are two separate worlds. Valdosta is the deep south, very close to the Florida Panhandle, a place where Confederate flags still fly high and proud alongside statues of Confederate leaders. The roots of racism run deep here. Lowndes County, where Valdosta is, became famous in the early 1900s for one of the most heinous acts of lynching in the history of our country. In 1918, Mary Turner and her baby were brutally killed here in Lowndes County, and their story became worldwide news. Mary's husband had been lynched, and she had spoken out against it. For speaking her truth, an angry, racist mob tracked her down. They tied her up, cut her stomach out, ripped her baby out, and stomped on the baby's head. Then they lynched Mary. These are the stories of this region, and when you look closely, you find the history of Valdosta and the history of racism in this country go hand in hand. Valdosta was originally created because the railroad company was building across southern Georgia. There was no city where the stop would be, so they put one there and named it after the governor's plantation where he kept all his slaves. Due to the railroad stop, Valdosta became a central hub of commerce to trading food, goods, services, and of course, slaves. Shortly after the Civil War, an event called the Clift Affair made big news. A Republican politician by the name of Clift was garnering support of freed slaves by speaking out against white supremacy. This angered the whites of Valdosta. So on the day of the event, the local KKK chapter set 5 bombs to go off in the crowd, but one went off. No one was hurt, but the news of the attempted bombing reached far and wide, and Valdosta was at the center of it. Valdosta made worldwide news once again because of their horrible killing in 1918 of Mary Turner. In 1922, this now famous group shot of the Valdosta KKK chapter was released. And in 2018, workers at the local Jimmy John's made news when a video surfaced online of them playing with a KKK outfit inside the store. And on the anniversary of Mary Turner's death, her memorial was shot up with bullets. Although Black Americans are the majority of the town, making up more than 50% of the population, political power is still concentrated in the hands of the whites. This minority wields its control with a vice-like grip that keeps the black majority under a constant state of terror.
Now, knowing this about the city of Valdosta, imagine what the Johnson family is up against while trying to figure out what happened to KJ. So being that the sheriff told the Johnson family it didn't look like foul play was involved in Kendrick's death, this is the theory they told them as well as put out to the media. So they say KJ was trying to retrieve his shoes from inside of this 6-foot rolled up mat. Now, the mat was standing up vertically, so the shoe was basically on the floor and the mat was on top of it. So to paint the picture a little bit better and make it make more sense visually, imagine having a tall glass. Then you place, say, a mouse inside of this glass. And instead of slightly tilting the glass over and trying to slide the mouse out, you dig your big hand down the middle and try to grab the mouse. Makes no sense, right? So they're saying KJ somehow jumped 6 feet on top of this mat. That's not that sturdy, by the way. So he sees his shoe at the center on the ground, and he decides to dive headfirst into the center of this rolled up mat. He then gets stuck and suffocates to death. And on top of that, it's about 1:20 p.m. in the middle of the school day. So people are moving in and out of the gym, and you would think he would probably scream or cry out for help because, of course, he's suffocating to death, right? This isn't a fast process. But instead, he doesn't try to get anyone's attention, and apparently he just climbs down silently and dies. Now, Kendrick is about 5'10", and the mat is 6 feet tall. How exactly did he get to the top of this mat? So they're saying that there are bleachers near the rolled up mats, and there are indeed bleachers there, but the first set of bleachers is only about as tall as a chair. And then the higher up you go on the bleachers, the further up away you are from the mats. So climbing up the bleachers really wouldn't be beneficial if you're trying to get to the top of the mats. So the question now is, how did he jump all the way to the top of the mat? And why were his shoes in the mat to begin with? Now, to answer that particular question, when a couple of the students were questioned, they told authorities that the students would have to pay for lockers. So instead of paying for the lockers, they would just hide their shoes inside of the gym mats. But to get their shoes out, all they would really have to do is just tilt the mat slightly and then pull their stuff out. And KJ's friends even came forward saying these mats were standing up vertically. And on top of that, when you walk past the gym, these mats are out of view. And of course, you can't see behind them because the mats are blocking the view. So his friend says because these mats are out of view, what they would do is throw their shoes or their backpacks over the mats, but never inside of the mats. And then when it was time for practice or time for gym class, they would walk around the mats and retrieve their belongings. So at no point did they ever have to look inside the mat, climb on top of it, lift it up, none of that. And on top of that, the sheriff's theory doesn't make any sense. In fact, when you look at the opening of all of the rolled up mats, they were only about 14 inches wide. Yet KJ's shoulders were about 19 inches wide. So they're saying not only did he fit inside of this tight 14-inch hole, but he somehow slid all the way in and got stuck. And something else that makes no sense about this theory is that Kendrick's head was covered in blood, and there was vomit on the ground near his body when they moved the mat. But these gym shoes that he supposedly dove down the mat to get didn't have any vomit or blood on them at all. In fact, it looked like the gym shoes had been placed in after his body was already inside the mat. Because there's no way if he was diving in to get the shoes that they don't have any blood or vomit on them, but he does. But from here in the investigation, things only get stranger. So for starters, the family says when they go to the medical examiner's office to finally ID Kendrick's body, they were initially taken aback at how warm it was in the ME's office. And even as they opened the drawer where Kendrick's body was being kept, they felt a gush of hot air as soon as the drawer was opened. Now, y'all know I'm no expert by far. However, I'm almost positive the ME is supposed to be kept a certain temperature in order to preserve the bodies, and in this situation, as much evidence as possible. But being that it was so warm, this is just another thing that stood out as odd to the Johnson family. And as soon as the ME unzipped the body bag from head to toe, revealing Kendrick's face and body to his family for the first time, they knew they were being lied to. When his family saw him for the first time, they kept telling the sheriff's office, "Look at our son," because at this point, it was very clear Kendrick had been in a fight. His face was badly mutilated and disfigured, and there were obvious signs of bruising. He had hemorrhage all over his face, his eyes were swollen shut, his upper lip was swollen, like it was very clear that this was not accidental. And now it's starting to make even more sense why the sheriff's office wouldn't let the family into the gym to see his body. And after further examination of his body, they later discovered small cuts near KJ's nail beds. And after viewing these small cuts, experts not related to the case said that based off of the curvature and the shape, they were indicative of fingernail markings. And after looking at the images of KJ's autopsy, it opens up all these unhealed wounds from slavery and the civil rights, and most importantly, Emmett Till's story. And just like Mamie Till, the Johnson family kept fighting for answers and for authorities to look into these obvious leads. Now we clearly see that something happened to KJ. Because you mean to tell me we're sitting here looking at the same autopsy and you're still gonna look me dead in my face and say there's been no foul play? Oh, no way, Jose. No way, Jose. But still, the police kept brushing them off. We'll take care of it. We'll look into all leads. Just go home and grieve. But none of this was sitting well with the family. And as you could imagine, it only drove them to ask more questions and dig deeper. So when they finally received the autopsy photos from the police department, they released them to the public. They wanted everybody to see what they saw. And how dare you tell me this isn't foul play? But believe it or not, even after seeing these pictures of Kendrick's body, a lot of the white community was still siding with the police, saying that this was all in the family's head, and that they were just trying to get the community to be in an uproar, and also that they just needed to come to terms with their child's death. But in reality, all they wanted was the truth. So they kept digging for answers. And indeed, they do find more answers. This is when they find out that police hadn't called the coroner to the crime scene until 5 hours after KJ had been discovered. And get this is supposedly against the law in Georgia. The police are supposed to call the coroner as soon as a body is found. So that means they found KJ's body at around 10:30 in the morning, and they didn't call the coroner until around 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon. So when the coroner finally gets to the scene, he's like, whoa, wait a minute. Why did it take y'all 5 hours to call me? Now, ain't no telling what y'all been in here doing for the past 5 hours. Y'all could have unrolled him, then re-rolled him and positioned him to make him look however y'all wanted him to look. And since I don't know how many times he was moved, and who's even been near the crime scene, because it doesn't look like y'all taped anything off around here. So he has no idea how many people could have come in contact with KJ's body, or the crime scene. The coroner was later interviewed by CNN, and he says, quote, "The body had been moved, and the crime scene, in my opinion, had been compromised." But he later sends an email to CNN saying, quote, "I would appreciate if you would destroy the interview with me. I don't want this to be shown whatsoever, and I feel our situation should not be aired." Like, what? And y'all already know CNN is messy. So they went ahead and released the correspondence that they had of the interview with this coroner. Now, moving along, another detail that was questioned about the crime scene was the fact that there was 3 tennis shoes found at the crime scene. So 2 of them were inside of the mat with KJ's body. One pair was at the top near his head, supposedly the ones that he had dove in to get. And let's not forget they had no blood or vomit on them. And the second pair were at the end near his feet, but he wasn't wearing them. But more importantly, both of these shoes looked like they had been thrown in after he had already been placed inside the mat, remember? And both of those shoes did in fact belong to KJ. But there was also a third pair of shoes found in the gym, and these shoes didn't belong to KJ. And what makes this more eerie is that they find what looks to be blood splatter on these third pair of shoes. But the police would later go on to say that this substance on the shoe was tested and it wasn't blood. Sure looked like blood splatter to me, but moving on. And get this, the shoe that had this red color, not blood splatter on it, was never even tagged as evidence. It was never logged. It was just never brought in as evidence whatsoever. So you know what that means? That means they didn't even bother to try to figure out who this third pair of shoes could have belonged to. And there was also blood on the walls of the gym as well. But guess what the police said? They said they tested that and that wasn't blood either. And when asked if they were going to even find out whose blood it was, they said no, because it didn't appear to be related to the crime scene. And it's like, oh, now it's a crime scene. I thought it was just an accident. Continuing on, there was also a gray hoodie found near Kendrick's body, with, again, what appeared to be blood stains on it. Now, it didn't belong to KJ, and of course, police didn't test it, they didn't log it, and it was not considered evidence. So, whose hoodie was it? But this has got to be the most mishandled, half-assed investigation I've ever seen in my life. Everything is supposed to be bagged, tagged, and considered evidence. But instead, these bozos are like, does that look like blood? Yeah? Throw it away. Are those KJ's belongings? No? Okay, go ahead and put that over there in the trash too. Like nothing is making sense right now. So looking at the crime scene as a whole, as I've already stated several times, it looked as if KJ had been rolled into the mat. And at the time that he was in the mat, he had to have already been unconscious or dead. The mat was then placed upright, so it was harder for someone to see what was inside. And something else that supports the theory that KJ was rolled inside of the mat is that you can see his legs were twisted up. Now, if this had happened naturally and he supposedly slid down the mat, then naturally his legs wouldn't be twisted, right? So with all of these unanswered questions still looming, this raggedy-ass Georgia medical examiner still ruled KJ's death an accident by positional asphyxia. So the thing about death by asphyxiation is that you're gonna find fluid in the lungs, which then means that your lungs are gonna be 4 times its normal weight. But in KJ's case, Kendrick's lungs were the same size and normal weight, meaning there was no fluid in them. So now we have even more evidence that contradicts the authorities' theory. So why would the medical examiner still rule this an accidental death when KJ's lungs clearly tell a different story? And to add more salt to this already open wound, the paramedics that arrived to the scene wrote in their report that police didn't immediately treat this like a homicide or a crime scene. Like I mentioned earlier, they didn't tape the area off, and they said that there was bruising to the right side of his eye. Now, the school is also covered in surveillance cameras. I mean, that's great news, right? So eventually, they were able to recover surveillance from 4 cameras showing Kendrick on them. Okay, now, so these 4 camera angles show every entrance to the old gym. And lo and behold, every single one of these 4 camera frames was missing a large chunk of time from about 12:04 p.m. to around 1:09 p.m. And on top of that, where the mats are positioned in the gym, they're not visible to any of these cameras. So it makes absolutely no sense that he died in a gym that was never empty. You see, there was constantly students moving around and passing through the gym. There were literally students having pickup games in that very gym. And not to mention, the walls echo in a gym. So how did nobody hear Kendrick? And right now, it seems like we'll never know what actually happened to KJ in that gym. Because the CCTV footage that was released to the police had been tampered with. And it just seems like this investigation is just continuously piling on lies and covering up. And for who and why? And then come to find out, the police waited months to even ask the school for the surveillance footage. And they damn near weren't even going to ask for the surveillance footage until the federal prosecutors got involved. And on top of that, they didn't even bother to go to the school to retrieve this evidence. They waited for the school to drop it off to them. And after looking at the footage, forensic surveillance experts said that it had clearly been tampered with. So with all of this covered up evidence, KJ's family continued to fight. And since the sheriff and everybody in a position of power refused to dig into their child's death, they started holding peaceful protests. And being that the sheriff and everybody else refused to listen to them, they figured the best thing they could do was to get KJ's case publicized. So they marched and protested outside of the courthouse every single day. And they even had dozens of community members come together and march for 4 days straight from Valdosta to Atlanta. 17 miles symbolizing 17 years of KJ's life. And again, all they wanted was a fair investigation and justice for KJ's death. But white citizens were still driving past him yelling, "Go get a job!" Like, does it ever cross your mind that this could have been anybody's child? And what if this was your white child? Then what? And it didn't seem to matter how hard the family dug or what new piece of evidence they brought forward to support Kendrick's death not being an accident. They were still stonewalled at every corner they turned. But one day during one of their nonviolent protests, all of the protesters decided that they were going to link their arms together and stand outside of the courthouse. But of course, instead of this being peaceful, both KJ's mom and dad were arrested. And at first, the people were just as outraged as Kenny and Jackie. But after seeing two grieving parents arrested for wanting answers for their son's death, higher authorities and the people started to dig a little bit deeper into Kendrick's story. And that's when they started to see for themselves that something wasn't right. And believe it or not, the Johnsons' arrest gave KJ's case the attention it needed in the media. And that's when the family said enough is enough. And they decided to reach out to another medical examiner out of Florida by the name of Dr. William R. Anderson. And Dr. Anderson had been practicing pathology for over 40 years. So after the family hired their own medical examiner, they decided to exhume KJ's body and have a second autopsy performed. Jackie says that having to dig her baby up was almost worse than having to bury him the first time. But this case makes me absolutely sick to my stomach, the extremes these people went to cover up KJ's death. And all the things they're putting this family through just to cover up the truth. When the second autopsy is being performed, everybody is in utter shock at what they find. Because when they open KJ back up, all of his organs are missing. And the cavities where his organs are supposed to be have been replaced with newspaper. So Dr. Anderson, he's like, this isn't normal. And he reaches out to the National Association of Medical Examiners, and they're like, yeah, we've never heard of this practice either, and we don't condone. And this just raises more questions. So they're like, who would do something like this? And the only people that had access to KJ's body were the medical examiners in Georgia and the funeral home. And of course, Jackie and Kenneth didn't give any type of consent to have his organs taken or donated. So why are they missing? So when the funeral home is questioned about where his organs are, they're like, we don't know nothing. We received the body without the organs. But all in the same breath, this is contradicting information because there's an actual document signed by the funeral home stating that they received the body from the GBI with the organs. But then the GBI comes forward and releases a statement stating that they did in fact put the organs back after the autopsy. So if it wasn't the GBI, it wasn't the medical examiner, and it wasn't the funeral home, then who in the hell was it? So when asked why KJ was stuffed with newspaper, the funeral home says that it is standard to stuff the bodies with cotton, especially if the organs have been taken out to be studied in science or if they've been donated or whatever, because they have to fill those cavities in order to keep the body from caving in. And they're like, okay, we understand having to fill those cavities, but his mom was so heartbroken by this because she's like, You stuffed my baby's body with newspaper like he was garbage, like he was a trash bin. And it's just more suspicious that the funeral home signed off with the GBI saying not only did they receive the organs, but they also received the clothes that Kendrick had died in. But now they're backtracking and saying, no, we never received those clothes and we don't have them. So not only are his organs missing, now his clothing, which is even more evidence. Like, ugh, what are y'all hiding? So, being that his organs are missing and further testing can't be done on them during this second autopsy, this medical examiner goes ahead and looks at the rest of his body. So, with that, the medical examiner finds hemorrhage underneath the jaw. And this area underneath the jaw that he's referring to in particular is near the carotid nerve system. And this is essentially the nerve system that controls blood pressure. And if there's blunt force trauma to this nerve system, it could slow your heart rate enough to cause death. So the second private medical examiner says that the cause of death is blunt force trauma to the neck, which would explain why the first medical examiner said that there was no fluid in the lungs, which further proves that he didn't die by suffocation. And thankfully, after this second autopsy is performed, the U.S. Justice Department opens their own investigation into KJ's death. And with this, they subpoena over 120 parents and students to give statements. And this is when they finally get a break in the case. Because you see, there had been rumors circulating around Lowndes High about the Bell brothers. Brandon and Brian Bell are, you guessed it, two white brothers that attend high school and play sports with Kendrick. And allegedly, there'd been a little bit of a rivalry between Kendrick and the brothers before he passed. And they did have their fair share of run-ins, but more specifically with Brian Bell. So in one of the incidences, it states that Brian and KJ had gotten into a fight while they were on the bus headed to a football game. And in this particular incident, the parents did have to get involved. Now, it was said that Kendrick's sitting in his seat, minding his own business, and Brian just starts trying him. He grabs his dreads and then holds him down in between the seats. But Kendrick fights back and he gets up and overpowers him. And of course, Brian didn't like this. But when it was all said and done, Kendrick was the one being escorted away in a squad car. Meanwhile, Brian still got to watch the game from the stands with his family. And after this situation, this rivalry turned up a notch. So much so that Kendrick brought it up to his dad that he would sometimes feel somebody staring at him. And then when he would look up, it would be Brian. Now, when the investigation first started months ago, the Bell brothers lawyered up. But now that everybody had been subpoenaed, they now had no other choice but to come in and answer questions. But they used this opportunity to not only talk to the cops, but to also speak to the media. And during one of the media interviews, Brian is asked if he saw KJ at any time during the day on June 10th. And he says no. Now, y'all just remember that answer, okay? So y'all, not only are these two white teenagers being accused of killing a black boy, their dad is also a decorated FBI agent, y'all. And according to a homicide detective from DC, who was called to be one of the federal investigators in this case, his name is Mitch Credle. And he says that people were talking about how this FBI father was scaring them before they could even talk to police. In fact, on one account, one woman comes forward saying that this FBI father keeps coming to me asking if I've talked to the police yet. And he even waited outside of my job, staring into my shop. Now, of course, the dad lied and said that this never happened. But U.S. Marshals do eventually do a full search of the Bells' home. And I don't believe they found any super compelling evidence. But after the search was conducted, Brandon Bell does an interview saying, "I want everyone to know. And I mean, they can ridicule me, they can do whatever they want. But in the end, the truth will prevail. And everyone will find out that me and my brother have been innocent and always will be innocent." Oh, shut the hell up. And as we can see throughout this investigation, authorities were receiving solid leads. They were just choosing to ignore them. Because at some point, the sheriff's department ends up receiving an anonymous email from a teenage girl that goes to Lowndes High. So because they were minors, their names were redacted, so they'll be referred to as Jane and Joe. The email reads, My best friend was at a party Saturday night with Jane, and she was upset about something Joe said to her. She said a little over a year ago, she had sexual intercourse with Kendrick Johnson while she was dating Joe. Joe found out, threatens KJ. KJ tells Joe to meet him in the gym after 3rd block and he would have his knife ready. Joe and Joe's friend meet KJ and kill him. Joe has also been heard admitting to killing KJ more than once over the phone. His brother also got drunk at a party on 4th of July and told many people that Joe killed KJ, and that Joe's brother is tired of keeping it a secret. Now, sources say one of the boys in this email is the son of an FBI agent. So they eventually find out who sent this email. They track her down. But believe this or not, when they track her down, she claims that she didn't know any of this information from first-hand accounts and that she was just basing it off of high school rumors and high school speculation. So she recanted this email and her entire statement. Also, another student was telling people he heard a spontaneous confession from one of the brothers wrapped up in KJ's death. Cops found out about it and they later arrested him on a weak-ass trespassing charge. And they held him in jail for so long without bonds that when he got out, he too recanted his entire story, saying that he wasn't telling the truth. We're almost done, cousins. But the documentary goes on to state, quote, "When it comes to justice in Lowndes County, it's all about who you know. And in this case, you have Lowndes County High School, the superintendent's office, the GBI, the FBI, and the DOJ. Now, Kendrick's family strongly believes that the cover-up started right from the beginning, when the GBI found out that one of their own agent's sons killed Kendrick. So instead of doing the right thing, they covered for him. They protected him. And then it just trickled on down to the medical examiner, and then to the funeral home. Then they spread false information to the public. And that's how they were able to cover up KJ's death. If y'all thought I was done giving you all the facts, it only gets worse. Because y'all remember after the second autopsy when the U.S. Justice Department opened its own investigation? Well, not long after this investigation was opened, the U.S. Attorney Michael Moore suddenly resigned in 2015 as a chief prosecutor. And this right here is literally like spitting in somebody's face. Because Michael Moore was the attorney who put the Bell brothers right in the bullseye of the investigation. And then he just suddenly up and resigns from his good old chief prosecuting job to go work at some law firm in Atlanta. But when he resigned, all of his cases went to his successor, except for Kendrick's. And then without question, KJ's case was moved from Georgia to Ohio. Like, how do you just change states like that? Is that even possible? And why is everybody either leaving their positions or running far, far away from this case? Now, eventually, investigators did recover the CCTV footage that had been tampered with. And in the recovered footage, it shows Kendrick and Brian walking near each other at some point during the day. Now, remember I told y'all to remember Brian's statement from earlier about him saying no to not seeing Kendrick at any point during the day on January 10th. Oh my gosh, it is so exhausting how they're just letting this continue on. But a year after Kendrick's death in 2014, Kendrick's family sued the school district, and the Board of Education because they said one of the brothers bullied and attacked Kendrick before. They said sometimes even in front of the coaches. And then in 2015, the family also filed a $100 million lawsuit against the FBI and against the Bell brothers' father, claiming that he ordered the Bell brothers to kill Kendrick. Now, Jackie did later dismiss this lawsuit, but she was then hit with a lawsuit for legal fees and for defamation of the Bell family. Like, what the fuck? Y'all, I'm not even going to ask y'all to imagine what the Johnson family is going through anymore, because who in the hell would want to have to live through this? The very people who are supposed to be on their side protecting them are the very same people who are covering up evidence, gaslighting them, and most importantly, lying to them. So later on in the investigation, an anonymous group came forward offering more information on Kendrick's death. So this group says that students at Lowndes High knew what happened to Kendrick, but they were afraid to come forward because their graduation was being threatened. Just your graduation? That's it? Y'all know how fast I would have came off some information if I had it? I would have called Congress. Hell, the president himself.
Hello? Hi, yes, I have some valuable information.
But in 2018, Jackie and the family are still fighting. So she files an affidavit that states, redacted person confessed that their friend killed KJ and that he hit KJ in the neck with a 45-pound dumbbell. Then they went and deleted the high school CCTV footage. But it's like, who helped them delete their surveillance footage? It had to be a faculty member that was in good with the parents. I don't know. Y'all tell me what you think. So with this new information that KJ was in fact hit in the neck and with the 45-pound dumbbell, the family then has a third autopsy performed. And the third autopsy confirms the second autopsy's findings. So this Dr. William Anderson reaches out to two other pathologists, and they too confirm that KJ had been killed by blunt force trauma. But y'all, even with all of this evidence supporting that KJ had been murdered, the family was still shut down from every direction, and eventually the task force that was assigned to KJ's case was pulled off of it. So the case was reopened in March of 2021, and after being open for 10 months, it was closed with the ruling still standing of an accidental death. But just in case y'all may have missed any facts of the case, I'm gonna let Jennifer Lewis sum everything up for y'all.
So let me get this straight. A 5'10" kid decided to go head first into a 6-foot mat, then realized after he was stuck that he was gonna die down there. And then he died down there, stuck. Somehow silently, with a gym full of kids playing basketball and changing classes around him. Then his shoes magically appeared on the top of his body, inside the mat shoved into the hole. His legs became twisted in the mat. And all of this happened in the middle of the school day in a gym full of kids. Then somehow the videotape from only those moments is missing. Then Kendrick's organs go missing. 7 judges recuse themselves. The U.S. attorney working on the case resigns. And then your case moves to Ohio. Then it's officially closed by the Justice Department, who tells you in a meeting the crime scene has planted objects. Your autopsy report is correct. Your child was murdered, and there's nothing else we can do about it. One thing we kept hearing over and over again was about this missing FBI report regarding the security tape hard drive and the blacked out footage. So we looked into finding that report to see if we could locate it, and we did. However, the report was heavily redacted. But then we were able to find the unredacted FBI report, and what we discovered blew us away. You see, in the redacted report, you can barely see any of the video frames. Most of the frames are blacked out, and the ones with KJ are barely recognizable. In the unredacted report, we were able to see all the video frames in full color. The report follows KJ, Brian, and Brandon's movement throughout the school for the entire day and records where they were. Not only is this further video evidence that the Bell Boys were on campus when KJ went missing, we found something that the FBI clearly didn't want us to see.
Well, cousins, that's pretty much the end of this week's case. To this day, the Johnson family still have so many unanswered questions, yet they're still being treated like they're doing something wrong for wanting to know what happened to their child. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Make sure you're following me on whatever platform you're listening on. Leave me a 5-star review and pass me around the dinner table.
Guns and butter.